know what they mean by Episcopal calisthenics. You know, in a lot of Episcopal schools, they do morning prayer every Sunday, every day before they go to school, and it's at getting up and down for the readings, up for the psalms, and then they kneel to pray. So it wakes them up before they go to class. So over this Advent, we have been looking at a theme that was introduced the very first week in the scriptures on that very first week, and that was the theme of keeping awake during Advent. So we've been looking all through these 4 weeks at things we need to keep awake to. We've used the candles and some Advent words with each candles to think about things that we might want to be awake to in Advent. For example, we talked the first week about being awake to hope and being awake to the kind of hope that we realize when instead of just hoping for things in the future that may or may not happen, we learn to wake up to the present and see what hope there is and the possibilities that the present gives us. And so we talked about that the first week. The second week, as we lit the second candle and we remembered the phrase, the way, we talked about a way of living life where we notice what story we're living by and whether or not that story is a helpful story or a hurtful story. And we talked about when we notice that the story is something that is causing pain and suffering for us or for somebody else, about stepping back from that and looking at how we might change and leaving ourselves open to be changed so that we can be awake in a way that is helpful to all. So then last week we didn't get to really talk about joy because we had a lot of joy as we did the nativity pageant, and this week is peace. So I want to talk about joy and peace and keeping awake to joy and peace at the same time today. And actually, it appears that I'm not the first one to think about linking joy and peace. That may come as a surprise to you that I wouldn't be the first one to think of that. If you noticed in the second reading we had today from the letter to the Thessalonians, those two words are linked right in that letter. In the first paragraph, it talks about rejoice always, and calls us to look at a life in a way that we are constantly looking for the joy in it. And then in the second paragraph, it addresses a prayer that's a prayer for the well-being of all of us, and it addresses it to the God of peace. We might wonder why a prayer for the well-being of all of us would be addressed to God emphasizing peace, the God of peace. And I think the only reason we don't get that is because of sometimes what we think of when we think of peace. Like, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say peace to you? You can talk back to me. No war. Okay. That's usually what comes to most people's mind. No war, no conflict. And yet the peace that is talked about in Scripture includes that, but is much broader than that and much deeper than that. Whenever you see the word peace in Scripture, in the back of the writer's mind is the Hebrew word shalom. That's the word for peace in Hebrew, but even as they wrote in Greek, that understanding of shalom was there. Because shalom is not just about no war. Shalom is about a complete harmony, a completeness, a well-being for us and for everything. That well-being where all is in the harmony that is intended to be by God, where we are in harmony with God perfectly, completely, where we're in harmony with our own true being that gets covered up a lot of the time, completely, in harmony with each other, in harmony with all of God's creation, animal kingdom, plant kingdom, the universe. So all of that is a part of shalom. So obviously, when the writer is talking about a prayer to God for well-being, he addresses the God of shalom, the God of peace. So we need to remember that when we think of peace and pray for peace and read about peace, that it's more than just not fighting each other. That it's about all of us having everything we need and being completely who we were intended to be in all of God's creation. That's a word about peace, a little footnote about peace. Here's a little footnote about joy I want to give to you. There is an author named Eckhart Tolle. How many of you have read anything by him? He's a spiritual writer. He's very popular today. Wonderful writer. I really commend any of his books to you. In one of his books, The Power of Now, he has or maybe it's in Stillness Speaking, can't remember. Anyway, one of his books, he has a definition of joy that he just sort of throws off as a part of a paragraph, and yet it was incredibly powerful to me. He talks about joy as vibrantly alive peace. Vibrantly alive peace. Now think about that a minute. Think about the fact that when we are at peace, when we're able to find that stillness in us that comes when we are not covering up who we are with all these things that we think we have to do or worried about, when we're really in that stillness of who we are perfectly, there can't help but be joy. And so joy and peace are not only linked together for convenience sake, but there's really something about each of them that affects the other. That we find joy when we are able to enter into the shalom, when we are enter into peace. Of course, the reverse is also true. Whatever disturbs our peace also prevents us from finding joy. And so a lot of times we go through life with our peace being disturbed all of the time and wondering why there's no joy in it. But when our peace is prevented, our joy is blocked. It doesn't have to be that way, though. There have been people throughout all of the ages who have been able to, in incredibly hard circumstances, find a peace where they could find joy. And I think this is because somehow they got it that peace isn't established by all of these external things that we think of. I mean, we think that we can only have peace when this is right, when this happens, when this stops happening. If I'm sick, how could I have peace? If I'm not sure where my next meal is going to come from, how could I have peace? If I'm a prisoner, how could I have peace? We think that we can't have peace because of all these life experiences. And yet the kind of peace, the shalom that we're talking about, is not dependent on all of the external life experiences. It comes from inside. I've seen this over and over again with people in cancer treatments, especially ones that have had to have several years of the treatments. And at some time, if they're really working on things in there, they begin to discover a peace inside that isn't dependent on what happens to their physical bodies. It's not even dependent for a lot of them anymore on whether they survive the cancer or not. It's simply a peace that allows them to live each day authentically. And in that internal peace, they're even able to find joy. There's stories from Holocaust survivors that talk about how in just absolutely horrible conditions and not knowing what had happened to their families, they were able to go back and they were able in their heads to keep the Jewish holidays, because obviously they couldn't observe them in their cells. But in their heads, you can't take away what's in someone's head and heart. And they would just simply do that when it came time for Passover or Rosh Hashanah or anything. They would do that in their heads and go through it, and they would find a peace in that. And in not allowing the external circumstances to destroy their peace and finding an internal peace, they were even able from time to time to get momentary joys, like watching an insect go across their cell and getting all caught up in the movement of that insect. Wow. How many of us would just step on it? Peace, shalom, is not dependent on our life circumstances. It's an internal matter. And so we don't have to let it be blocked. And we don't have to miss our joy because of it. So how? How do we keep our peace from being disturbed by all of the things that go on, by the things we read, by the things we talk about, by some things that just bore us? Well, there are lots of ways, but here's one. It amazes me how often we come to any situation and our first thought is about whether we like it or not. I'm in a conversation and the person has maybe a sentence out before I've already started deciding, do I like what they're saying or not? And how that conversation continues depends a lot on whether I like what they're saying or not. If I don't like what they're saying, I'm probably going to miss the rest of the sentences while I'm thinking about how to argue with them or how to get away from the conversation or something like that. I've already rushed to that judgment, and my peace is destroyed, and I can't even experience the joy of being with that person because I'm so quick to not like what they were saying. Or I come to an experience. Now this happens for a lot of people in church a lot. They don't like something, like that hymn they don't know. And so they all of a sudden decide, well, I don't like it, I don't know it. And so they've missed the words, they've missed the music, they've missed any way of entering into it. Prayers of the people, they go on too long, they read too many names. And before long, that thought has taken them away, and their peace has been disturbed, and they miss the joy of the opportunity to come here each week and lift people that we don't even know up in prayer for their well-being. Oh my gosh, what an honor, what a privilege. That we can just pass off as, oh God, that's boring. Because it didn't stimulate us. It disturbed our peace, and we missed the joy. And you could go on and on with all sorts of different things. Because we're so quick to rush to a judgment instead of just allowing ourselves to enter into the experience. I mean, even if we are bored with something, and we can't find any way of connecting with what it's doing, we can enter into the experience of being bored. Explore how it is to be bored and restless. And before long, you will begin to maybe even find some humor and perhaps even some joy. One way to stand in the way of our peace preventers and our joy blockers is to step back from being so quick to rush to judgment over and over and over again. And let ourselves simply enter into what's going on. And allow ourselves to be surprised sometimes by joy. So each week, I've given you homework for the week. And you can probably guess what your homework is, since it's had a pattern. Your homework this week is to notice when you are rushing to judgment about something. To notice when all of a sudden those thoughts and feelings are surrounding, I don't like it, I don't want it, I'm bored, why do they do this? Notice when it comes up. And stop. Wake up to what you're doing. Which you notice has been the homework all along. It's usually stop something so you can wake up to something else. So this time when you rush to judgment, stop yourself. Just suspend the judgment. You don't have to like it. Is that news to you? That you don't have to like what's happening? How many of you have ever told your child you don't have to like something that's happening? And yet we forget to tell ourselves, you don't have to like it, but it's your life right then. Enter into it. Let it be for you what it can be. And that's your homework this week. May God bless you in it. May you find joy. May you find this way. May you find peace. And may you remember back at the very first that that's where hope comes. May it be so. Amen.